It's something straight out of Hollywood. A thief is on the run.
Late night robbery at a big name.
This is really quite a story, and it all happened right here at the Bellagio.
Imagine a story so wild it feels ripped straight from a Hollywood blockbuster, except it's all real. This is the wild, unbelievable story of Tony Carleo, the man who robbed the Bellagio and almost got away with it until one reckless post on the legendary 2+2 poker forums brought it all crashing down. Once upon a time, there was a young man named Tony Carleo who had a story he loved to share about a visit to Las Vegas when he was in his early 20s. During this visit, Tony witnessed an event that would forever alter his life. Surrounded by a throng of people gathered around a craps table, he saw one man against all odds turn a mere $5 into a staggering $50,000. Tony thought that if the other person could do it, then he could do it too, feeling convinced that fortune might smile upon him as well. Fast forward to December of 2010, Tony decided to test his belief. In the early hours of a Tuesday morning, he arrived at the Bellagio with a plan. He parked his Suzuki motorcycle strategically, donned dark coveralls, rubber gloves, and a motorcycle helmet with the visor down. Concealed in his pocket was a weapon which he intended to use only as a deterrent. As he entered the Bellagio, he waved at a lone security guard and he waved back, oblivious to his intentions. Inside, he moved stealthily past the deserted slot machines, his mind sharpened by the adrenaline. Just days earlier, Tony had successfully robbed another establishment, netting $19,000 and thus boosting his confidence. Tony's target was the high-limit craps table, the only one open at that hour. With adrenaline coursing through his veins, he approached the table, brandishing his weapon and shouting for everyone to move. The players and dealers recoiled in shock, and Tony seized the opportunity to scoop as many chips as he could, stuffing them into a backpack. A valet attendant attempted to block his path, but Tony waved his weapon and the man stepped aside. Revving his motorcycle, Tony sped away into the night, leaving the Bellagio behind. In his backpack were chips worth nearly $1.5 million, a haul that far surpassed his previous score. Tony's audacious heist at the Bellagio had made him a millionaire, at least in theory. The reality was more complicated. He had stolen chips, not cash, which meant his newfound wealth was confined to the Bellagio itself. To convert his chips into money, Tony faced the daunting task of repeatedly visiting the Bellagio under the scrutiny of countless security cameras. Each visit required him to hand over chips to the cashier, hoping they would exchange them for cash without alerting the authorities. Undeterred, Tony returned to the Bellagio the very next night. There were no signs he was a wanted man, no posters, no suspicious glances from dealers or security. He settled into a high-stakes poker game using $100 bills from his previous robbery to buy in. As the night progressed, he discreetly added a few stolen $5,000 chips to his stack. The Bellagio's lack of interest in tracking poker winners and losers worked in his favor, allowing him to cash out without incident. In the weeks following his audacious heist, Tony Carleo's life spiraled into a whirlwind of excess and recklessness. However, the real drain on his stolen fortune was gambling. Tony reveled in his high roller lifestyle, indifferent to the outcomes of the tables. Whether he won or lost, he would cash out tens of thousands of dollars, living as if his supply of stolen chips was endless. A significant portion of Tony's haul consisted of $25,000 cranberry-colored chips, which were typically reserved for the highest of high rollers. These chips were not easily convertible for someone like him, whose name was absent from the Bellagio's records of legitimate high rollers. Aware that cashing even a single cranberry could arouse suspicion, Tony nonetheless acted with little restraint, indulging in the fantasy of limitless wealth. Tony's substance abuse had escalated alarmingly, and his physical condition became bad with swallow skin and sunken eyes. Meanwhile, Las Vegas detectives Sam Smith and Jason Nelson were tirelessly pursuing leads in the biker bandit case. Their breakthrough came when they met Leo, a poker dealer at the Bellagio. Leo claimed to know the robber's identity. He recounted a conversation with a poker player who had fantasized about stealing chips, specifically mentioning the cranberry chips. Shortly after the robbery, Leo noticed the same player suddenly flush with money, playing in games beyond his usual means. The player's name, Leo revealed, was Tony Carleo. Detective Nelson's investigation into Tony Carleo was marked by a series of red flags that pointed to Carleo's involvement in the Bellagio heist. Tony's sudden shift to high stakes, despite having declared bankruptcy a year prior, was suspicious enough. The fact that his father, George Assad, was a sitting Las Vegas judge added pressure to ensure the investigation was thorough and accurate. Meanwhile, Tony had become a regular at the Bellagio, only leaving to manage his stash of stolen chips or deposit laundered cash into a safety deposit box. At one point, this box held over $100,000, but his funds dwindled to $20,000 as he continued to gamble. Of the $400,000 in easily convertible chips he had stolen, only one $5,000 chip remained. Tony still possessed over $1 million in $25,000 chips, but these were nearly impossible to use without raising suspicion. Desperate to offload the chips, Tony even considered enlisting a high-profile poker player like Phil Ivey to help him cash them in. Meanwhile, on the 2+2 poker forum, a thread had been started to discuss the Bellagio heist and how the thief might offload the stolen chips. Tony closely monitored the thread and even created an account under the username OceanSpray25, listing his location as Granada, which is a reference to cranberry juice, as the 25,000 Bellagio chips are pink. A user named This Passing was speculating about the odds of how often the robber might be checking the discussion thread, and right there, Tony chimed in with the answer. In an attempt to be subtle, Tony casually asked if anyone was interested in buying $25,000 chips at a discount, cleverly referring to them as a piece of fruit because of their cranberry color. Then he followed up with this gem. So has anyone heard about the Bellagio robber, or does anyone know where to get some discounted cranberries? I can't say that I wouldn't buy a few for $5,000 each and then figure out what to do with them. I'd imagine that's a good problem to solve, in my opinion, of course. At one point, Matthew Brooks, aka Provo Trout, posed a hypothetical question. How many potentially worthless cranberries would you accept for a legit $5,000 chip? Tony Carleo wasted no time and began bombarding Brooks with private messages. Would you be willing to trade 4 $5,000 chips for 3 $25,000 chips? And if more were possible, how many could you handle? He asked. Brooks was skeptical that the person who committed the robbery might actually be on that forum. In one of his messages, Tony gave Brooks the number to a burner phone. Out of curiosity, Brooks called and had a 15-minute conversation during which Tony divulged details about the heist. When Brooks asked for proof, Tony sent an email from his home computer with a photo of 2 25K chips resting on a piece of paper signed Biker Bandit. Brooks immediately forwarded the incriminating photo to the Bellagio and Las Vegas police, who quickly traced the email's IP address back to the home of Tony's father, Judge George Assad. Unaware of the impending danger, Tony was participating in a $1,500 buy-in poker tournament. Despite being outmatched by the young professionals, luck seemed to be on his side, and by dinner break, he felt optimistic about his chances. However, his plans for a quick dinner were interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Kian Cave, who had heard about Tony's $25,000 chips. He cautiously engaged with Cave, eventually agreeing to meet with Dominic, a connected figure from New Jersey who was interested in buying the chips. Dominic's Italian-American charisma appealed to Tony, who was eager for a connection beyond his usual interactions. Over the next few days, they bonded over blackjack games, football bets, and lavish dinners, culminating in a deal for the stolen chips. On January 30th, Dominic offered Tony $10,000 in cash and smaller denomination chips, which he accepted, handing over a $25,000 chip in return. Their transactions continued in various locations around Las Vegas, with Tony selling Dominic $100,000 worth of stolen chips. However, during their final meeting in a Bellagio bathroom on February 2nd, Tony sensed a shift in Dominic's demeanor. After handing over the chips, Dominic left without a word, leaving him with a foreboding sense of impending doom. Tony's intuition proved correct when 6 Metro Police officers burst into the bathroom, ordering Tony to the floor. The reality of his situation crashed down on him, marking the end of his brief, ill-gotten reign as a millionaire within the confines of the Bellagio. The man Tony Carleo knew as Dominic was in fact Mike Gennaro, an undercover Las Vegas police officer. Gennaro, with the help of his friend Dr. Cave, orchestrated a sting operation to catch Tony. Gennaro used $50,000 provided by the Bellagio to engage Tony in the operation. 7 weeks after Tony's daring escape from the Bellagio, he was arrested and let out through a service entrance, marking the end of his brief stint as a millionaire. His father, George Assad, facing re-election, publicly stated his belief in accountability for those who break the law. Ironically, just a week before Tony pleaded guilty, Assad lost his seat on the bench. Tony was sentenced to 9 years at Nevada's Lovelock Correctional Center. He acknowledged that the robberies were a mistake and that incarceration likely saved him from a fatal overdose. Despite expressing remorse for disappointing his family, Tony also lamented his failure to successfully execute his plan. He struggled with the gambler's eternal question: why didn't he walk away when he had the chance?